here's something I want to touch on when it comes to the election and the cultural gender crosscurrents. I saw a few of these Kamala Harris rallies, and there's all this chatter and stupid discussion between Trump and Harris about how many people are attending these rallies. But the main thing I've noticed, is how many of the people there are women and how many of those women are old. And when I say that, I'm not saying that as a negative indicator of her chance to win, because if you wanted to really do well with a one voting cohort that was highly likely to show up and show up in big numbers, it would be old women. So that's not me going, oh, this means she's going to lose because it's a bunch of geriatric ladies in the audience. But I also just, I look at that. It's very odd to me in my millennial brain, having remembered the rise of Barack Obama and how many people in those crowds were young, young men. It seems like abortion is the main cultural issue for the Democratic Party, which you'd intuitively would think would be an issue that young women would think about. But instead, so many of the people there are grandma age. What sort of thoughts do you have about that?
I think that young women, women younger than me, have never really needed to be galvanized by the abortion issue. I don't know. It was such a kind of a settled thing for so long. And now I do think that the valences of it have changed somewhat, just because the technology that we have to control fertility is so different from what it was. Older women who talk about this frequently invoke the specter of like the back alley coat hanger abortion, which obviously was a terrible time, and so many women died, and it was ghastly. Nobody ever wants to go back there. But even if abortion was even if a 15-week ban was instituted nationwide federally, we wouldn't end up going back there because the technology surrounding abortion has changed so much. And so I think that part of what's happening, it's not that young women care less about being able to control their fertility, but they just don't think about it in the same way as somebody who came up in like the 1970s did. We have so much like better access to birth control and so many more different kinds of birth control. If you don't want to get pregnant, it is just really, really, really easy to not get pregnant. And also, if you end up pregnant and you don't want to be, as long as you're less than 12 weeks along, you can get a medication abortion. You can do it at home, and it's going to be, not like easy peasy, but it's going to be a lot less fraught, a lot less invasive, a lot less painful, physically and emotionally, than having to go to a clinic and undergo a D&C. And so I just think that the whole way that young women experience this as an issue and experience like their own bodies as tied into it has changed in ways that women of older generations don't entirely understand or appreciate.
That makes a lot of sense. I also just think that there's been some vibe shift where politics is cringe again, which might be good. I don't know if politics should be so culturally relevant and young people should be so invested in politics. It might actually be good if it's not as much a part of that conversation. I'm not sure. I've certainly seen a shift. This is the other thing. If we're talking about the gender dynamics, I'm repeating somebody else's tweet. The Wall Street Journal looked at all the survey data about Gen Z and the gender split between Gen Z males, Gen Z females, and this guy who I think worked briefly for the DeSantis campaign and is a Gen Z conservative writer said, I've posted a bunch about this before. There's a lot of evidence that Gen Z overall is moving right, even as Gen Z women are moving left, which suggests that Gen Z men's rightward shift is potentially even more drastic than Gen Z women's leftward shift. This is another thing that I think is hard for the millennial mind to fathom, because we came up in this era where Barack Obama was very popular with young men, and there would be no real inconsistency or surprise with a young man being quite liberal and being lefty. I mean, not that there is now, but it would just be almost what one might expect. This is very much something I don't think that was ever predicted that's happening. And the Wall Street Journal is getting into it, but I feel as though the rest of the media is almost a little uncomfortable with it. They don't know how to talk about it at all. What is your impression of this with young men becoming more conservative, potentially?
So the thing that I'm wondering is, are young men becoming more conservative, or has the landscape moved underneath all of us in a way that has put the center in a different place and left young men in an unusual position? I'm curious, actually, not to turn your question back on you, but I'm actually really curious what you think about this. You know, what are the issues, like, policy-wise, or is it even policies, or is it just vibes that speak more to young men from the right that make them sort of more attracted to that? Because when I think about it, like, I think about, okay, well, you know, who are your avatars for each side? And on one side, you have Donald Trump, who, you know, like, I find loathsome, but I also understand why he would be appealing to young men, because he's kind of incredibly funny in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
and
he's the eternal naughty boy. He's the naughty class clown.
He's a funny character. And that's the thing. Also, I realized that I was going to ask you a question, and now I'm just kind of like answering my own. So forgive me. But I think that we're in this moment where we're really doing politics as fandoms is something that I've been thinking and writing about a lot, to the point where it's really about creating a cult of personality around whoever the candidate is. And I don't think that there's anybody on the left who can create that kind of effect amongst young men. I mean, maybe Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just because she's incredibly beautiful. So she has like the sex appeal thing going for her. But I don't know. I mean, if you're looking for a personality, a character who's like larger than life, who people are going to rally around, it's not hard to understand why for guys in their 20s, that person is Donald Trump and not Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it's not rooted in policy. I mean, Obama was just implicitly interesting and inspiring to a lot of young men. He wasn't talking about how divorce law is unfair to males or running on anything specifically tailored to a cohort in this gendered way. But it is vibes. It is this sort of sense of that the Democratic Party has gotten more feminized. I don't say that pejoratively. I think it's just true. I mean, even today, the Kamala Harris campaign tweeted out a slogan of trust women. I believe it was in regards to the abortion decision, but it's trust women. Would they ever say trust men? I don't think that they would say trust men. They wouldn't say trust men. And my take on the whole thing is that I don't think the Gen Z males are being misled. I actually think that they're just responding to the vibes they're getting. I think people lock in political identification at a young age, and then from that point forward, it's just what makes sense to them for the most part. And so millennial age men, I don't think, see a lot of this, or they don't experience a lot of this. They've made their choice. They've got their party. If it's the Democrats, it's the Democrats. But I think the Gen Zers are more up for grabs, and they can clearly see that one party is more playing in their sandbox and is talking to the cultural figures that they find relevant. And the other party just doesn't seem to like them, and seems a little uptight and more inclined to policing language and policing norms and conformity. And I think, yeah, naughtiness, shit stirring, being honest, politically incorrect, whatever you want to call it, is appealing to a lot of young men. And whether you like it or not, or you judge them harshly or not, and I certainly saw some people responding to that Wall Street Journal article lamenting what these young men don't understand, they're not really being played to. they're not really being courted. And ultimately, you get what you emphasize.
I was just thinking about, is there a single like male figure on the left right now, prominent, who could be aspirational to young men in the way that Barack Obama was? I mean, Barack Obama was like, I mean, that was an election that had, well, I mean, obviously people were very galvanized by the fact that we were going to elect the first Black president. And that was very exciting, I think, to a lot of young folks. But Obama was himself young, and he was very masculine in a way that was like, he was sort of comfortable with it. I think that a lot of people responded to that. It was like a healthy model of masculinity, and he was cool, you know, like he had a hot wife, and he smoked cigarettes, and he, you know, I don't know, like it's difficult to imagine somebody even with that amount of kind of comfortably masculine personality being elevated on the left now. We really have become the side where the scolds live, like where the church ladies are, even though they don't go to church.